Podcasters Roundtable, round 151. Rolling past 150, Dave. We'll just keep trucking. And today we're going to learn how to dominate podcasting, because apparently that's what Spotify is doing. That's what Anchor is doing. But we'll get into that. Well, let's meet the Roundtable. Co-host Dave Jackson, welcome back.
Ray, glad to be here. Dave Jackson, schoolofpodcasting.com.
Everybody missed all the tech issues. All the people watching live. Hello to everyone. I see you in the chat. Before we started, I also didn't hit record because of that. So we're going to start again. This is going to be amazing.
That's good. I will not say my name super loud because I was like, oh wait.
No, you're good. All right. Podcasters Roundtable, round 151. How to dominate podcasting. Now I feel like a Gary Vee video. Dave Jackson, co-host. Welcome back.
Dude, I'm so ready to dominate and be stoked. And yeah, Dave Jackson, schoolofpodcasting.com.
We're going to crush it, Dave.
That's
Dave,
it.
your book in the background kind of looks like a Gary Vee book. It looks like Crush It in a different color. Profit to Podcast. Congrats, Dave.
Thank you, sir.
I want to promote that up front. You guys, Dave has a book. It's physical. You can buy it and hold it.
I don't have it, but
unlike Dave, which you can't buy or hold.
Usually I have a little light that just sits there and
look at that. What do you have, a selfie light? What is that? It's
that is
a light on a stick.
It's a reading light. You clip it to a book.
Light. No, you are an influencer, Dave. No wonder your book looks like that.
Here, I'll throw this on the monitor. There we go.
All right, that's amazing.
This is great audio.
Great audio. New roundtabler, Angela. Welcome to Podcasters Roundtable.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
What is your podcast?
My podcast is Now Look Inward with Angela Connor.
All right. What's the elevator or the tagline, elevator pitch tagline?
Let's see. I think I say something like a challenge to corporate America to sweep around its own front door and make Black voices and contributions matter across the organization. So just, really talking about workplace issues in corporate America. People are sharing their truths and corporate leaders are learning a lot. They're telling me they like it, so I'll keep doing it.
Fantastic. Awesome. Everyone check that out. And another new roundtabler, Zack, welcome to the roundtable.
Hey, thanks for having me. You guys are really helpful when I was starting out a year and a half ago at this point. Thanks for podcasting about podcasting. I'm Zack Jackson, one of the hosts of the Down the Wormhole podcast. We talk about the relationship between science and religion. We got a rabbi, pastor, a couple of professors, and we just go for it.
That's got to be fun.
It's the highlight of my life.
Wow.
That's nice. Are you both relatively new? Angela, how long have you been podcasting?
So you want to count all my attempts before?
Sure.
I mean,
go way back.
Yeah.
So let's see. I think I've been listening to podcasts probably about 10 years. One I listened to recently, it was like, we're at episode 750. And I'm thinking I think I heard 100. So let's see, probably about 10 years. This podcast I just started in June, but I had another one that's still out there. And even before that, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I tried. But I think my interest was not where it needed to be. I know that now. My interest and my ability to follow through wasn't what it should be. And I know now you have to have a lot of that.
So what was the, as we derail right in the beginning, just like we should, Dave.
That's what we
right
do.
Off the tracks. We don't do stories. We
tangent first. That's our motto.
We do roundtablers. We want to know more. What you said, do I want to know about the ones that didn't work? What was the thing, excuse me, what was the thing that made this one work?
My commitment and actually my passion for the topic. Honestly, the passion for the topic, because that's what kept me going. That's what keeps me going. It keeps me getting guests. It keeps me doing solo casts. It's just something I really care about, which is why, I think you have to really feel something about your podcast, because if you don't, it's going to die on the vine.
Yeah. And Zack, what about you? How long? You said just over a year and a half or something?
This podcast, we launched it last July. Prior to that, I was just doing some podcast production work for folks, just an audio head. But this one, we've been doing weekly since then.
And so were there other podcasts where you were hosting that you tried to start?
No, not that I've hosted. I'm a pastor professionally, so I'm a professional talker. And
Gotcha. And what do you think? What's the key for you to lasting a year and a half? Because a lot of people start and it's sort of relevant to what we're going to talk about. At least my spammy intro there is relevant because we're talking about Anchor. What was the key, do you think?
Absolutely the people I'm with. Like if I tried to do this myself, I can tell you I would have started real strong and I would have produced like 12 episodes in the first week and then nothing after that. But I got a couple of people who are just so organized, who like put the brakes on. We planned at the beginning of our podcast for about 6 months of meetings and spreadsheets, and like these people are professors, right? And there's like a chemist on board, and so they're people who think like that. And without them, no, I wouldn't do it. I'm just the audio guy and the big picture guy.
So co-hosts for you was the key.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It helps with this show. I mean, my solo show I'm not currently doing, so it must help. I mean, being, having other people who are counting on you to show up makes it easier than when you're by yourself. Of course, aligning schedules can always be tricky too. Dave, you've done co-host and plenty of solo shows. Do you feel a different? I mean, you're good at being consistent, so I don't know that one or the other drives you more, but
when you have, especially like on like this show, we have 4 people. When the more people you add, the harder it is to be consistent. Because the one show I do, my co-host is in Omaha. So it's always a weird thing where like I'm podcasting at 11 at night. It's 8 o'clock his time. It's just, you get into things. When the early days of podcasting, I did a podcast with Gary Leland, who was in Dallas. Rob Walsh was in St. Louis, and Paul Culligan was in, I think, Colorado. And I was always like, it's 1 o'clock in the morning and Dave is up podcasting because it's, whatever, 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock their time. So that's the part that really gets kind of tricky. But I think the key to it is, for me, and I'm mad because I didn't do it today. I have usually a phone with me all the time, and Evernote is my best friend. So that when I have an idea and I go, oh, I should write that down, I now know that means right now. Because if I don't write it down, I had something today and I got out of the shower. That's where I get my best ideas. And I was like, I should go write this down because I'm going to forget it. My little voice in my head said, oh no, you got it. Remember, it's just yada, yada, yada. And then later, all of a sudden, at lunch, I'm like, oh crap, I never wrote that down. What was it? And I was like, it's gone, whatever it was. So I think that's a key to being consistent is I'm always working on 3 episodes ahead so that, you just keep churning and everything. I had a friend of mine that was a professional comedian, and he said that was one of the weirdest things when he quit, because I watch TV, I watch movies, I listen to the radio, all that, but I'm really studying it as I'm watching it. And so I think that's the other thing. I think we might look at media a little different than somebody who's just catching the news.
I'm dying to know who our 4th is. You said we have 4. We picked up a co-host, and I didn't know. Maybe you were just looking at the panel today.
I'm looking at the panel today, yeah.
Okay, because I think you mixed there. Because
Yeah.
I was like, well, Daniel's not with us today,
Right.
but he is the 3rd co-host. And I was excited. I thought we picked up someone new on the free agent mark that I didn't know about. All right, well, maybe Angela's the new co-host. Awesome. All right, well, I guess we could get into some stories. Let's go with, that first one. I usually go with the clickbait story that I used, which was mine. Did anyone read that one? The Spotify. There was an article that said Spotify says it's dominating the podcast market because of 1 million plus tiny podcasts. So essentially what I got from this is that Spotify says that all the shows on Anchor, right? So they own Anchor. There's just tons of shows there. And Anchor's also been responsible for a very large uptick in the number of podcasts over the last maybe 2 years. We really need Daniel for this one. This is where I'm really going to miss Daniel. He has all these numbers. But, and they are saying that Anchor provides more, I guess, downloads, more listens on Spotify than any other third-party platform. So more stuff coming from Blueberry, Libsyn, anywhere else. And, I guess that they're saying that they're dominating podcasting because of Anchor and all these millions, or not millions, but hundreds of thousands. How many have they added? Like tens of thousands, easy shows over the last couple of years. But as we know, a lot of those shows are like 2 and 3 episodes, and then they're gone. So I'm curious about the quality of this metric, right? Like, does the fact that they have, I don't know how many thousands of shows with 3 episodes, 1 episode, and maybe they get a listen, does just like this mass. I think I put it in the email list. I said, if you made a podcast, if you made 500 podcasts, 3 episodes a piece, would you be the number one podcaster? Right? Just by sheer numbers, right? Because people are clicking on the thing. So I don't know. I didn't dig too deep in the article, but I thought it was just kind of funny that Spotify is sort of claiming dominance because of Anchor. So do anyone else dig into that article?
I did, and I wonder though if there needs to be some sort of rule, like you're not really a podcast until you get 7 episodes. You know, you think about how views don't matter unless it's like 5 seconds, just depending on whatever
Right.
tool or metric. I mean, but there are metrics for things like that. I mean, Nielsen has ways that it measures, and you know, if you're running Facebook ads, you might not, you might have the metric of the 5-second view or the 10-second view. So it just made me think about that, because you're absolutely right. I know it's the 1 and 2 episodes that make those numbers go so high. So I wonder if we need some kind of standard for that.
Yeah. Out at Daniel's site, mypodcastreviews.com/stats, 58% of podcasts are inactive. And that means they haven't had an episode out in 90 days. And as I look at
All
the
podcasts, Dave?
that is
50% of all podcasts?
of all podcasts. And that is, as I scroll up, 1.68 million. And 50% of them have less than 10 episodes.
Wow.
Right.
So
and
that's
then
what
you filter out like time, like since last produced. I mean, the number gets
Right.
really small when you get down to the group of podcasts that put out something at least once every couple weeks. And I think the number is even like there's more cushion than that. It's like, have you put out an episode in the last 90 days or something?
Well, I have a show called Your Podcast Consultant, and I was seeing if I was in, like, did I list my show on Spotify yet?
I didn't. Did you rename a show? I don't know.
No, it's a somewhat new one. It's it's in true day fashion. It's an experiment. It's 9 minutes or less, so it's a really, really short show.
Is this like an Amazon show? Is this some kind of echo thing?
No,
9
but I
minutes or
might
less?
now I think about it.
Isn't that like the 9? Isn't that like a
Yeah, it
an
has to
echo
be.
thing? All right.
The reason I picked 9 minutes is that's how long it takes Jimmy Fallon to get to his first commercial. And I was like, apparently that's the attention span of people. No, that's about 20 minutes. But I typed it in and I saw an Anchor show called, the name of it was Podcast Consultant, and it had 1 episode. And I was like, that kind of sums up Anchor in a pretty bow.
What if it was a really good episode and they were just done? That's
That was it.
Got all
What if
the
that's
secrets right
maybe
there.
Yeah.
it might be a dominating strategy. Maybe it's like maybe they got all the sales. Everything is in. What maybe is it like a 19-hour episode?
I just remember looking at it going, really? Because there was no cover art either. It just
Dave,
screamed.
I think someone is just way ahead of us.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
And yet you found it.
and yet I found it. Yeah. Couldn't find my show probably.
I run into a lot of these small podcasts on Anchor that, might have 3 or 4 episodes, but they've already started running ads on it.
Oh yeah.
Because
And the ad is for
Anchor.
Anchor. That's the only
Anchor.
sponsor I've ever seen on Anchor. So the one thing that's supposed to be bringing in money for them is actually helping them lose even more. So, yeah.
Well, a lot of that is too. I mean, I have my own PR firm, and so I work with a lot of brands, and a lot of that is we need a podcast. We need a podcast. And so, and I have to back people into a strategy, because I won't even go down that road if you can't plan it out and give me the reason and what business objective it supports. But there's so much, we need a podcast. If a competitor gets one, forget it. Like, we need it today.
Isn't that so funny? Sorry, Angela. Isn't that so funny? Because it made me think of you and starting a few, and then it was the passion that was the key. But when we deal with like organizations or companies, it's a weird thing, because passion doesn't always necessarily need to be there. Well, it does for, I think, the host, but in order for it to keep going, if someone is paid to make this thing go, it might not go very well, right? So what you're saying strikes me as interesting in the difference between one of us or an independent, a solo person starting a podcast where you are the only driver, no one's being paid to edit, post, any of that stuff, versus a company. But I like that you won't even go there, because it will fail. Even if they keep doing it, it probably won't be good, right?
Yeah, or there's just no plan for it. It's we need a podcast. And someone even said to me, "Hey, we started a podcast, can you listen to it?" And I said, "Well, where is it hosted? Like is it where do I find it?" And they sent me some audio files.
Hmm.
And I had to tell them, "You don't have a podcast, you have audio files."
You have audio on the internet. And
Maybe.
the one that always kind of surprises me, I'll ask somebody, how will you know when your podcast is successful? And so many people go like, what do you mean by that? I'm like, well, like when we like if I'm losing weight and my goal is to lose 20 pounds, when I lose 20 pounds, I'm like, wow, I did it. And I'm like, so what's going to make you go, wow, this is working? And they're like, when I get more downloads. And I'm like, is this for your business? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, is the answer really when you get more customers? And they're like, oh yeah, that too. And I'm like, yeah, that's like, come on now. So I think a lot of people either don't want to admit that I'm in this to grow my business. I don't know. That's the one that's always, because you got to know why.
I don't think people thought about it, Dave. I think when you ask people that question, you get their response. It's the first time that
They've thought about it.
They've really thought about it. Like when you have to answer it, sure, it might cross your mind. You can easily let it go because you're not trying to answer somebody, right? But when you have to answer it, and I bet you when you did that, a lot of people listening actually had to take 2 seconds and think, what is my metric for success? I don't know that a lot of people a lot of people who listen to this show are going to be probably hobby podcasters, going to fall in that category. I don't know that you even necessarily quantify why you're starting a hobby podcast. You just do it, right? If you think about it, it's like, well, so we can have fun, right? If you want an answer, and that's easy, right? Because that's an easy thing to figure out.
Episode 2, are you
succeeding or
having
not,
fun?
right? But I bet people don't. Most people have not. I would love you put it in the chat. Let's see how long it takes.
Yeah.
Like how do you know? Answer that question. How do you know? We'll put some answers up. How do you know your podcast, the podcast you started, the one you're running? What is your metric for success?
Yeah.
That's
Because I remember
question.
I had a client of mine once and I asked him, I go, how's the podcast going? He's like, it's all right. And I'm like, you getting any feedback? Like, and he's like, oh yeah, a little bit here. And I'm like, wait, hold on. Let's back up. What's the why? He goes, oh, that's easy. He goes, I get to talk to people I have no business talking to. He goes, I could never get past the gatekeepers. And he goes, and now I just call up the CEO and go, want to be on my podcast? And they're like, yeah. And he goes, and that just gets the door open for me to build a relationship with that company. He goes, it's not that I don't care about my audience and I don't care about downloads. He goes, but I did this because I want to talk to people and they wouldn't talk to me. So that's a metric in some cases. And it might be, I just want to get the word out. It might be, I want more people on my email list. It might just be, I want to have fun with my cousin.
But that's a strategy that's also being touted and taught. Get a podcast and interview the people you want as clients because you play into the vanity metric, just the vanity overall, and people want to be interviewed. I mean, that's being taught. And podcasting is also it's starting to be seen as another piece in the content marketing bucket, which is when we get to the story that I submitted is kind of about that. So if people are seeing it as, another check for the content marketing piece, let's just get our podcast and check. And why do we have it? So we can say we have it. We now have a podcast. And then there's no plan around it. It's like a tactic in search of a strategy. And I'm seeing a lot of that.
Yeah.
Do you think, so that's not enough for you, Angela, right? Is not being able to talk to, I mean, in that way, could you just say, well, but if you want to be a thought leader, right?
Right. So I think if that's your goal, I think just having the goal is what's needed.
Yeah.
Like your reason for being. If you can say, I have this podcast because I want to interview industry leaders and maybe they'll hire me because they'll see how great and awesome I am. At least you've got a goal. So you're going to keep doing it. And that's your reason for being. But that is something that is actually being taught for people to do as a strategy to get clients. I'm hearing it more.
Yeah. Jim Collison's daughter is getting ready to graduate from college as a journalist, and she's starting a podcast because she wants to use it as a resume and say, hey, I've done stories on this and that. Go listen to my podcast. And I was like, there you go. Because I always say, usually the podcast is not your business; it's your business card, and so that's a way to use that as well.
But didn't we do that with blogs? Remember?
Yeah, it's true.
Zack, I want to know, I'll put you on the spot here. You've had a few minutes at least to think about. What is your metric for success in your podcast?
Well, we had Dr. Scott, the paleontologist from PBS's Dinosaur Train on the show. And that for me, that was the success right there. No, I'll tell you what though. Early on, I was checking checking our numbers every single day, and I knew that Wednesday spike like the back of my hand, and I could tell you like, oh, this Wednesday we did better than last Wednesday. That must be this social sharing thing we did or whatever. But like, I don't know. After a while, I realized like that's not translating into anything, and that's not why I'm doing this anyway. Like we started our podcast because no one else was doing it. Like I could not find a podcast about science and religion that wasn't a podcast about how you can still go to church and believe in God. Like, I mean, believe in science. Like that is kind of where it started and ended with the 3 podcasts that are out there like that. And I really wanted to learn a lot more. And so I got some friends together. Well, they got me together too. And I've like, we just, it's become a wonderful little community, and like I'm in it for that, for the community that we've got, and for just that spreadsheet that we have of all those things we haven't gotten to talk about yet. And you know, the numbers are really fun. I'm convinced that, you know, it breaks down by countries, that we've got 3 visitors, 3 listens about every week from other, and I'm convinced that those are astronauts, and no one is going to tell me otherwise, and that's my metric for success.
I produce podcasts, and I'm sort of behind the scenes on a lot of podcasts at my work. And I'm going to tell you the coolest thing that just happened. I just was posting this one podcast, and I said, is that an astronaut on the International Space Station joining the podcast Zoom call via Zoom from the International Space Station? Yes, she was. So this podcast, so it's called This Week in Virology. They interviewed her. She's in space right now, and they interviewed her on the podcast. She's a microbiologist who's an astronaut, and she's up there right now. And she was also the first person to vote in space. So I just couldn't believe it. I mean, how many podcasts get to call the international? And there's this moment in it where Houston literally patches the podcaster into the ISS, and it's incredible. So
all right, I have a new metric for success.
So it's possible that you can actually get that other metric to be an actual astronaut.
Wow.
Anyways, that's very cool. But you know what you were saying there is interesting to me in that sometimes, I mean, you had an interest was there. You found a need, right? It wasn't being served, and that was enough to start. And I think sometimes maybe the why can come later. You just wanted to do this thing because you weren't getting it. And what's cool about podcasting sometimes is that you don't know what's going to happen, and things happen that you didn't plan for. So right now it's still early times, and who knows, right? I mean, maybe there was never a plan to monetize, but you're getting good numbers. You're reaching people who weren't being reached before because they didn't have the outlet. That could be sponsorship. I mean, things can change, right? It's different for a person than it is probably an organization, right, Angela?
I think so. I mean, and again, some organizations have lots of different reasons why they want to do it. Sometimes it's associated with a campaign. It might be for thought leadership because we want people to hear from our CEO. I'm seeing more and more of it for even internal communications. Employees don't read emails and we can't get in touch with them. So let's do a podcast. So I'm seeing a lot of that too.
Yeah, I almost pitched that as well because
I remember when I was a copier technician, we would every Monday we would all drive probably a half hour, maybe 45 minutes to the central office, and they would get in there and the head sales guy would go, "We need to sell more. Get out there and sell. Win one for the Gipper. Rah company. All right, let's do it." And then we would all spend another half hour, 45 minutes driving back to our territories. And I look at that now and I'm like, that could have been a podcast. We could have been listening to the go win one for the Gipper, rah sales on the way to the first sales call. And you don't have to pay people their time. You don't have to pay mileage. I'm like, for me, if you're doing sales meetings, unless you want to, I don't know, square dance at the end or something that you need people, and we're going to pretend that people can be together. To me, that's a great way to have a meeting without having a meeting. And plus, with technology, you can see that Harold in accounting didn't listen to last week's episode. So get on it, Harold.
Every meeting is now a Zoom call, Dave. So we know, we know who's there and who's not.
Yeah. Meetings that used to be phone calls now have to have video.
Everything's got to be on video. Yeah. You're like, we don't have to turn on our cameras today, do we? Let's just do avatars. Yeah. Avatars and voice. All right. Well, hey, let's jump into another story. Angela, you said that what we were talking about was a sort of a segue into one of your stories. Let's do that.
Yeah, there was a story about a company. I won't name it or anything, but what they're essentially doing, they've created sort of a platform where you can do like text to podcasting. So if you go to their website, you'll see we can turn any content into a podcast.
Hmm.
And so I thought it'd be good for us to talk about, because does every piece of content need to be a podcast? And one thing in particular that was on the site was, got an ebook, we can turn that into a podcast. Well, okay, the ebook that nobody even read or was interested in, now you're going to make it a podcast. And then that was just me being snarky. Even if the ebook is fantastic and great, so it becomes a podcast, and then what? It's part of those millions of podcasts on Anchor, right? It becomes another one of those. How? What's the shelf life of a podcast that's based on an ebook?
Is this a robo podcast? Like, is it?
No, they're real voice actors.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't
And
do
it
my
just
homework.
said, pick a voice, male, female, send us the content. And then so it's not even anyone that's connected with your organization or you.
Right.
It's kind of like, how you go on some articles now and you can click for it to be read to you. I know
Yeah.
that's pretty, I mean, I actually like that sometimes, but it's any content. And that's why I said what I said earlier about it becoming podcast being seen as part of like the content marketing stack. Because I
Mhm.
think there's this whole idea of it now, because podcasts are owned content, part of the paid, owned, earned, shared media. It's owned, so it's smart. But I just don't know that an ebook needs to be a podcast, or a blog post needs to be a podcast. So I just thought, I mean, it's a great service, I guess, but what's that going to do? Just add a bunch of other stuff that doesn't really need to be out there?
Well, the
These-
Guardian's been doing that with their audio long reads, where they'll take some of their longer pieces and narrate them, and they have a podcast that I find super helpful, because sometimes I'm sitting in front of a computer screen trying to read a long article, and I'm done. I'm distracted by something else, and so I'm into that. But that's like quality journalism.
And that's news, that's publishers. I'm with that too. Read me
Yeah.
that article so I can make lunches and do all this other stuff. But I mean, I don't know if I want you to read me your ebook.
Well, that's it. I had a client this week, super cool guy, 74. He's got a podcast, and this is a guy that like grew up in the 60s, so he's got all sorts of bizarre stories and stuff. But he wrote them out and he was reading them, and it sounded like he was reading them. And I said, you're not monotone, but there's not a lot of voice inflection here. And I said, because he said he goes around and tells stories. I go, when you do those, are you reading it, or you just, is it like a presentation? And he's like, it's usually a presentation. I go, that's the problem. You're reading it. So I think in some cases, even if it's a professional voice person, for, Angela, you were talking how, you're passionate about your topic. That comes through. You get me talking about Anchor, my face will turn red, and I'll pop a blood vessel after a while. That comes through the audio. And I think if somebody just reading this, I don't know that that's going to come through. We've tried podcasting. I remember once you could dial a phone number and listen to somebody's podcast, and I'm like, okay, that's technology, but I'm like, it's still going to sound like the phone. And I'm like, that's just not, sometimes you're like,
right?
Do they do that? Did they bring that back? Because that's literally been tried about 4 times now. And I'm like, I don't know if you did your history lesson, but that doesn't work.
Though, as a pastor, when COVID started and like we shut down every church I know was trying to find ways to reach new people. And like, I helped so many people start a podcast or a YouTube channel, or like, I'm currently in a booth I built in my basement because
I was gonna ask you about that.
I've got children upstairs. You may have heard the ceiling is the only thing that's not soundproofed in here. It's just literally a little booth that's built on the ground, because I do so much of it now. This is like, I just work from home. And so a service like that, where it allowed people to call in, because we've got a lot of homebound members who don't have computers, that was pretty enticing. The problem with them was that there wasn't a dedicated number that they could call, the same number every time. It was like, I want to listen to a podcast, but I don't want to use my data. So I'm going to tell them this is the podcast and this is the number they generate for me. And it just wasn't useful for that. But like, I could see there being a very small market for people calling in to listen to podcasts.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's how I'm doing church for my church now, because I'm like the resident geek, and we had to start using Zoom, not because my audience, because the average age is 70 to this church, but because you could dial in on a phone and hear the pastor. So sometimes, again, you got to know who your audience is and what they can and can't do. So
I mean, there's the, having things available every way so that the person can consume it the way they want, right? It's a lot of
Right.
times why we end up with embed players on our website
Mm-hmm.
that don't get used very often. Maybe that's why we put our show notes in a PDF that's downloadable or even in the RSS feed. And that might be the amount of uptake you're going to get. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I'd want to pay for a service that's going to.
well, that was going to be my
text.
question,
Right.
because if it's a decent voiceover person, they're not cheap.
Yeah.
And now you're talking,
I
So-
scoured this website, and they were offering professional voice actors, and they were claiming it was cheaper than using these freelance voice acting sites. And I listened to their samples, and it sounded like a human. So I don't know what their business model is that they're claiming to be able to do this cheaper than otherwise, while also editing your files to make it sound more like a podcast. I don't know.
Well,
I'm sure it's working for
But I
somebody.
looked for work on that site because I was like, this is a pretty sweet gig. I'd love to do voiceover. They weren't
Nice.
hiring. So
I like that Angela wouldn't tell us the name. So if you want to know, that makes you go to the show notes, podcastraroundtable.com. Check that out. All right. And
I don't need anybody tweeting me saying I blew them up on your show and like.
I mean, we're not getting sponsorship money. You did all the things. This is perfect. This is perfect. We're gonna drive traffic to the website. We're gonna keep the free sponsorship out of it. So that's good stuff. Dave, you gave me like the most amazing memory, because I remember as a kid there was this mall that we go to, like, once a week we go visit my grandma. And we go to this mall, and there was this Flintstones thing that I'd run up to, and is that a grocery store? Outside the grocery store. It's like the arcade where you ride on the horse, put the quarter in. You could pick up the phone and listen to like the Flintstones.
Wow.
Got me every time. So I think I'm in for this phone call listen thing.
Okay.
It plays to me.
For all the kids listening, malls were these things where it
man.
was like this big building, and they had lots of stores inside. So
And the Flintstones were
Yeah, right.
the best.
Hey, come on. I think if I go look at the podcast analytics, I'm pretty sure the demo is right in this group. Solidly, Angela's, 29 to our 55. So
please. Angela's all 48. I wish. Actually, no, I don't.
We're in the wheelhouse. Come on. The people who start podcasts are 20. The people who keep podcasting are 45. That's my theory.
True.
I wonder what the metrics are on the demos on Podfade or even Anchor. Well, that probably skews young too, right? Because
yeah,
it's so easy and it's an app and it's just a different way of making a podcast. All right.
And
Anyways,
that's all the young people want is an app. I mean, that's it. I said the word software to my 15-year-old the other day. Asked her what software she was using to edit her videos. She goes, software. I said, yeah. She's like, Mom, nobody says that.
that's why you realize it's impossible to not get old, because who would have thought that, like, saying software, but immediately she's like, that is stuff old people say. You're like, but software is what's normal. I said Twitter. You don't call it Twitter anymore.
Don't ask them what software they're using. Don't do that. That was my mistake.
Well, I was laughing. I was listening to Jimmy Kahn got interviewed on Mark Maron's. And if you ever notice how older, and it may even younger actors who they still call them pictures. I was in a few pictures, and I'm like, what is it, 1920? Back in the day, oh, look, I'm in the pictures now. Here we go. All right. It's like, the heck? And I'm like, he's 70 something, but he's like, oh yeah, I remember when I did these pictures. And I was like, pictures? Like, not movies? Like, okay, whatever.
But why does album never die?
No, that's another one. Yeah, gonna drop my album. And I'm like, well, I guess if you have it specially made in vinyl, maybe,
It's the Kleenex of music, I guess. It's just,
I haven't listened to a podcast on my iPod in 15 years. So
yeah. Oh, breaking news, by the way, because I commented on this and it was part of the behind the scenes run up to starting this live stream a little late. I can adjust your guys' audio settings now. Like, that little 3 dots over, if you're in the interface that I'm in, I turned Dave down a little bit and Zack up, and that's amazing. It said beta. I think it's beta, but it's working. So back to the original origin of the show on Google Hangouts, which you always were able to do. I loved that ability because monitoring is really tricky on these things because I can't tell how loud I am. I can only compare it to what I'm hearing or compare everyone to themselves, but having control, because this is live. This goes to YouTube and it's finished. So a lot of times my audio would be too low or Dave's would be much higher. And that's it. That's what the final, so anyone watching is getting a much lesser experience than someone who's going to watch the post-processed or listen to the post-processed podcast. So if you use StreamYard, check it out. Hit those little dots on your guests and you can control their audio levels. So that's a throwback to something I always did. In the early days of Podcasters Roundtable and Google Hangouts, I was always giving updates. We can do this now, or we can do that. Like it was learning how to use Google Hangouts on air. RIP.
If only StreamYard will let me put on a pirate hat now. Or remember when they had that to Google Hangouts and sorts of.
We got to have something to aim for, Dave.
Yeah, it was like, how many useful features can we add to this software?
It's okay. We don't do that. Maybe update your logo. But a mallard with Skype headphones is a little weird. Dave, you're the winner of the mallard with Skype headphones, by the way. But it's free. You can't complain too much. We love you, StreamYard. All right, let's move on. Let's do another story. Zack. Wait, whose story did we do last? You guys decide. Steel cage match. Go for it.
Want to do rock, paper, scissors?
Yeah. I mean,
rock, paper, scissors is really bad audio. But it will push people over to the YouTube.
I was actually really interested in your other story.
It's just a lot of this. People are like, I don't know what's going on. Is it like golf claps? What's going on? Let's get that other story. I don't remember. So you guys jump in. Someone take the lead.
Yeah, go for it.
That's Angela's show.
So, so the other story that I had was, it was about the podcast of the year, Apple naming a podcast of the year. And I just thought it was, one, interesting that it happened, and two, interesting that it was a show called Code Switch, which is tackling a very tough topic. I mean, they talk about race and identity, and I mean, they don't shy away from anything. And I just thought, wow, okay, a podcast show of the year. And where's this going to go? Is it going to be like the Emmys? Will there be, votes tallied up and being brought in by, what's the accounting firm that brings in the?
You're right. I don't. Waterhouse something. Something like that.
Or something like that. Yeah. So I just thought, wow. But what's the criteria? Like, is there, going to be a big nomination? Right. Will there be red carpet one day and beautiful gowns? Like, who knows?
It'll be the first ever podcast award, Dave. The first ever podcast awards by Apple.
Yeah.
Every couple of years we get the brand new first to do podcast awards, which we all know is baloney because Todd has had the podcast awards since almost the inception.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But when Apple does something,
when Apple does it, it's first revolutionary. I guess this is the first time they've done this, right? And it didn't say anything about how they chose this. They just chose it, which is going to make a lot of people very skeptical.
Oh, sure.
Right. It's coming out of NPR, first of all. So.
Well, and anytime you want to make somebody mad, all you got to do is start handing out awards, because everybody who doesn't get one will tell you it's rigged, it's fake, it's whatever. And, they're going to take their ball and go home, and I'm never going to listen or participate or whatever. I was trying to find it because I know Jordan Harbinger they used to give like,
right. I feel like they've done something.
Like top tech podcast of 2007.
Yeah, there was sort of a ranking. But this was the only, I'm wondering why they did it. I assume it's marketing and trying to get a little buzz going and get people's attention on podcast. Ooh, what's this podcast? I'm going to check it out. Apple said it's the best. Right? I mean, it's interesting.
Looks great on a resume, that's for sure.
Sure does.
Yeah.
Not as good as talking to someone on the space station.
You're right.
I mean, maybe they have. I don't know.
I haven't listened to every
Deep Library
episode. I don't know.
Yeah.
I would be interested, though, in how it all went down, because, think about some of the biggest awards. They're based on submissions, whether or not you submit it yourself. You think about even people who win like 40 under 40 awards, somebody submitted you. It doesn't just fall from the sky. There aren't judges saying, oh, my God, look at that 34-year-old doing this, great work. She's great. Someone has to nominate you. And I wanted to know how it came to be, and I couldn't find that.
Yeah, it seems a bit editorial because I don't think it's based on number of downloads. Because I bet if it was, it would be some weird show no one knows. Because there are some crazy shows like crazy to me that have never heard of it, and it's that big, right? So there's probably like, I think Todd has said before, like some of the biggest shows that exist in terms of downloads comes out of like Brazil and stuff, like stuff. It probably not even English language. So like, I doubt it's based on some internal metrics that you can get at like Podcast Connect, Apple's stats or something. And it seems editorial. And Dave, like you were saying, it's not, Apple has done this. They've done top whatever. I mean, they've always done top lists. It's in there in Apple Podcasts, but they have definitely featured like the year's top podcast or something. It feels
but
familiar.
I don't think they've ever crowned a quote podcast of the year.
No.
So,
and it makes me wonder, I don't know, all the buzz right now is Spotify, but it's the music thing. So I'm sure you've seen it in your Instagram or something where everyone's posting what their top 5 listened songs were, their top album, their number 1 song. The best was the meme of the guy who's holding up the cardboard sign. He says, I get it. We get it. You listen to music, because just everyone's posting it. But someone in marketing thought of this thing that they've got these analytics for everybody and what you listen to. It included podcasts, actually. You would go on your Spotify, it'll tell you your top podcasts, your top music listened to, and people are sharing like crazy. So super win for them. I mean, the things that seem obvious sometimes, we don't always do, and they did, and they're killing it. And Apple's probably seeing that and been like, oh man, I bet we see that out of Apple now. I mean, they have all this data about you, and people love to know. I mean, it is interesting. You're like, I didn't realize I listened to 34 hours of a Madonna song. I couldn't pull a song. There are a few songs in this world, and I couldn't pull one out of my head.
I love that stuff to know about myself, but I don't want to know what everyone else is.
That's the problem, right? Everyone is going to tell you.
I don't care what you did. So for myself, it's fine, but yeah.
But that is half the fun of a list, is when you say, here are the top 10 guitarists, and there's somebody that's going to go, wait, what? Dave Gilmour from Pink Floyd isn't on the list? That's crap. And then they start telling other friends, did you see this list? And so the people that are even upset and hate it will still talk about it.
Oh, yeah. Because they just came to your Thanksgiving and started talking about politics. And now everyone is in a fist fight on the front lawn. Like, yeah, I mean, like, here you go. I mean, they just literally dumped this rage fodder into your Instagram feed. Yeah. All right. Well, that is cool. Yeah, it was definitely notable. I did see that.
I'll have to check it out.
Doing that.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to make it. I don't think we're going to be the Apple's top podcast. Speaking of the Apple guy, Steve, if you guys know, like BTS of, not the band. I realize now I'm using acronyms that aren't going to translate across ages
at all. No.
All right. Behind the scenes of Apple Podcast, Steve was the marketing guy and the main guy who ran, Steve Wilson, as he was like poached or went to another company who I'd never heard of, some podcast company called
Q something.
I'm careful there too, because it's not a conspiracy theory company. Yeah, it's a company I never heard of. But anyways, that was big Apple news in the sort of inside baseball side of podcasting. That Steve Wilson is left, and he was like, there's infamously not a lot of people at Apple Podcasts. There are more now than there were, say, over the last like 12 years. They hired more. We always used to talk about how there's like 2 people at Apple Podcast, and it takes them a while to approve your show. I think there's more now, but I don't think it's a big team.
Well, and they were like ninjas. Like somebody be like, yeah, I just saw him. He was right around the corner. And then you go around and just poof, they were gone. You're like,
I didn't know who they were for a long time. And then they and then you kind of knew about Steve. But anyways, if you follow, and we'll just move on from there. Who's Zack? What do you got?
Yeah. So I found this really fun article on Adweek that got me sent down this rabbit hole. where they were talking about the various car companies that are advertising in podcasts, and traditionally what you'd imagine the way that they would do on television, right? Like Cadillac spent a ton of money to put ads in I have over 1,000 podcasts.
Do they?
Um,
Interesting.
yeah,
I mean-
Hyundai. So Hyundai then is exclusively on Spotify, because we're on Spotify today. They put together this like 3-episode podcast where this host went to some musician, and they took a tour of their city, and they listened to their music along the way, and they talked about the car that they were in, and like that very much felt like an ad. And they have a whole micro site for it with the views and the video and the audio and whatnot, and that just feels like a nice ad. But then Ford made an 8-part podcast. That kind of feels like a true crime podcast, but is not, like an investigative podcast about bringing back the Ford Bronco. And they said that they got over 300,000 downloads on this podcast. And with about 25 minutes on average, like completion rate, which is a 94% completion rate on their episodes. And I was over on Apple and looking at these reviews, and people were just giving these 5-star reviews up and down. Like, this is amazing. I love my Bronco. When are we going to get new episodes? And one of the people from Ford said, like, well, it just made sense because you listen to podcasts in your car. So why wouldn't we give you a podcast about a car while you're in your car driving, right? And that just makes sense that you're there. And what I found so interesting about this was, like, I get the Cadillac model. That's old, right? We always talk about how to monetize your podcasts, and it's about getting big companies like that to put ads in the middle of whatever. But Ford just bypasses this, and they make their own podcast, and they don't have to pay anyone for ads. They've just paid some producers, and there you go. They've got this podcast with 300,000 downloads, and people are begging for the return of the Bronco. And was wondering if that works, and like it seems to be working fairly well for Ford. There's probably a lot more. It's probably better financially for them.
Oh yeah.
Like, is that the future of like, you'll get your top podcast, but then you'll get these random like 8-part series by, when Windows launches a new machine, and they'll have some guy going back to like a Y2K special to talk about Windows 2000 or whatnot. Like, is that the future? And
these are branded podcasts, right? I think that's what they're called. They're not necessarily new. I think there's a couple sort of notorious versions of this. GE did one called The Message. It was a sci-fi podcast. And it's basically where it's again, branded podcast. A brand makes a podcast that is not necessarily about the brand. In the case of GE Electric, The Message was a sci-fi story, and they produced it. And it wasn't even, you barely knew GE was a part of it, right? They just got media attention. They got things, right? And like a good podcast, like State Farm is there. I just made a brand.
There you go.
Anyways, Dave, you over there too. That's
Speaking
awesome.
of branding that works.
Yes. They look at how good they did. It stuck right in my little head there. No, but that just screwed me up completely.
It was
State Farm. Yeah.
GE Electric science.
GE had a sci-fi podcast.
Yeah, but I mean, it works really well. And I'm trying to think of some other really.
Dell did one that was interesting about changing technologies and things that interrupted technology, and they just said at the beginning, brought to you by Dell Systems or something like that. This is different because the topic is their product. They're talking about their product, but
this is branded podcast that actually leans into the brand.
Yeah. So it's like, if we go back to somebody like Gary Leland, who does a fast pitch, women's fast pitch softball, and he is a sponsor. Like, that's why he started that. So it's, where his sport is his product. And so he's got that. This is kind of the same thing, where if it's a branded podcast and it's, brought to you by Progressive, like, they're branding the whole thing, but it's really about some other topic that's not insurance. Because how do you do a podcast about it? I don't want to hear the Flow podcast, for the record. Flow can, anyway. but this was about their product. And that's what's interesting is it's not a giant commercial, but it's a giant commercial.
I mean, it is, right? Like,
Yeah.
because it is the product. And I think they found a formula they can repeat across Mustang. They could do the Pinto. I mean, like everyone's going to, people don't even, I mean, we used to race them in high school. Like we worked on Pinto. So like all of these vehicles, when you have a product that's iconic, you have, you have this that you can sort of do. Right. And it is interesting.
And they're just building the buzz. I mean, by the time this car comes out, people are like, I want my Bronco, man.
It's
What
out.
It is, it's a marketing play. I mean, it's branded content, but it's also,
Right.
I mean, don't think in the database, whatever Pardot or Salesforce or whatever it is they use, they don't have a database of all the former Bronco owners,
Right.
and then you just send that link to them. And we've created a podcast. There's your 300,000 downloads, people. It was the 300,000 people they emailed who they knew had Broncos, who was going to be pumped and psyched about the Bronco. There's not going to be just a random 300,000 people. I wouldn't care.
Right.
But I'm sure they have a way to go after people who would care. So now they've got a success story. Those are built-in success stories.
Yeah. And that's a key. Like you always, with a podcast, the people who are the most successful and or we know about most had an audience before they had a podcast. Right. So that's exactly what you have. They just found a different way to reconnect them to the brand, I guess, or get them to engage more. But,
and
I mean,
for all we know, that could be a tactic to see if there's even interest in the Bronco.
Right. It is a sandbox beta test. Like,
yeah, it could totally be that.
If we go back to 2006, the Podcast and Portable Media Expo done by the Podcast Brothers back then, and their whole thing, their podcast was about podcasting, but it was really, they would be interviewing, we got a new sponsor for the event. It's so-and-so microphones, and they would have them on and talk about their product. And then they would talk about news about podcasting, but the whole thing was building this big up, like it's coming, the Podcast and Portable Media Expo coming, in September, blah, blah, blah. So it really made you feel like I should be there. I should get one of these or something like that. So I can see where, again, it makes you get all hot and bothered about a Bronco. Because I'm sure they're saying it's different. Here's how it's better. This one, you can listen to podcasts in your Bronco.
It's actually ugly. I mean, I actually always wanted like a 65 Bronco, and now they did the same thing with Jeep. They just turned their cool, like rugged thing into a car. Anyways, we won't go down that rabbit hole, but you have fanatics. Like I said, all these brands, right? Chevy, every brand can do this. There is no ceiling for this. And it's just like when a celebrity starts a podcast, and most people, you see that X celebrity started a podcast and you're like, who cares? What's the point? Why is this just another person starting a podcast? How is that even working? They've got an audience for everyone who loves that celebrity. They don't have to worry about anyone else, right? They have the audience. Like every celebrity starts a podcast, isn't always necessarily successful, but they have an opportunity to be successful because they have the audience, right? And so all these brands who have an audience that is crazy around a product, I mean, it was a good idea. Yeah. And,
so
it is an evolution of that branded podcast. I like it.
I'm going to pitch to McDonald's to do a podcast about all of the regional variants of burgers around the world, and get them to pay me to go around the world after COVID's done and eat cheeseburgers. This is my goal.
Crazy. Do you realize that's not
I would
even
listen
crazy?
to that. Like,
yeah.
McDonald's did a podcast about the McRib. Talk about outrage.
Yeah,
it's like a love or a hate. McRib.
Yep.
Yeah. There
you go. But that was my other story was this new what is it? I think it's only an 8 or 9, 10 part show with Bill Gates and Rashida Jones, which just kind of came out of the blue. It was like a friend of theirs that they share in common was like, hey, Rashida Jones, who's really interesting? Bill Gates. You guys should do a podcast together. And they were like, all right, we're in COVID tide. We're not leaving our houses. Let's do a podcast. And like the first episode, they bring in Anthony Fauci because, of course, they're famous and they know these people and they can just do this. And then, so they've got this enormous platform already. The first episode is really interesting, by the way. I would plug that one. The second one, listening to Bill Gates talk about income inequality, was much less interesting. Being one of the richest men alive, talking about how we are supposed to live our lives as peasants, but whatever. I have opinions.
Meet Zack.
Yeah.
You know what? For me, I mean, again, you've taken. I mean, they stole the Podcaster Roundtable model, Dave. Take one person who has an audience and another person who has an audience, smash them together, and you got a mega audience like we have here at the Roundtable.
That's it. Well, that's what Bill's famous for, is stealing other people's ideas. So,
I mean, there's no that is the whole industry just takes. I mean, Twitter just got stories. Come on, they're all the apps are the same now. All apps have everything. Stealing is not. It's not stealing anymore.
Is a new idea.
It's modifying. Yeah.
So what you're saying is I need to do an investigative Xerox podcast about the origin that everyone stole from. And if Xerox, if you're listening, I'm here.
I think maybe try McDonald's first, but
you can go on your Twitter account and pitch the McRib podcast watch and do like hashtag McRib or something. People will tweet.
That's a way to get into a conversation. Hashtag something crazy like McRib.
McJustice. Yeah. I'm here for it.
I hate the McRib, and people will probably come for you.
Oh yeah, you'll have to change your Twitter name. It won't work.
that's it.
Any other stories? I'm not looking at the doc. I'm too busy enjoying everyone's face here.
The one story I found was, we can cover this in about 2 minutes, if that. The guy from Pacific, that guy that's always doing the cool stories with the stats, came out with Pacific Content. He analyzed 20 million Apple Podcasts star ratings, and what he learned was if you have more than 4 ratings, not a 4-star rating, more than 4 any ratings, you are doing better than 50% of podcasts. Many podcasts have 0 ratings, and this is where I again kind of go, you mean the ones on Anchor that did 1 episode and quit? Could be. The average rating is 4.6. And I say this just so I can say, please quit saying, rate and review me. It helps me get found in Apple Podcasts, because it does not. It's social proof. It does not help you get found in Apple Podcasts. And that's really all I wanted to say. But it was interesting. I'm like, and he has a whole bunch of things like what he goes by like genre, like true crime gets more, and all sorts of other. So it was an interesting read. I didn't know kind of what I was supposed to do with the information, but I was like, well, he definitely did a deep dive on that, and it was interesting. I just thought, it was like, oh, please don't tell me this is going to stoke the fires of I need more ratings and reviews. So
I read it. I thought it was good. And one piece that I thought was rather interesting was the amount of explicit podcasts. Did you see that piece? I don't remember what that number was. Maybe I can.
Well, this is the thing where one of the things that a great way to get an audience is to, for lack of a better phrase, piss off half of the audience. Like a client of mine said, hey, I want to do a show, not exactly like this, and it was Call Me Daddy. Have you ever heard Call Me Daddy? It's a girl who has no filter. She's got like 1.5 million Instagram followers and a couple million on Twitter. And she's just, like, and I'm not a prude, but we're talking like multiple F-bombs per minute. And just very much almost like Eric Cartman, screw you guys, I'm going home. Screw you guys, I'm going. It's just like, so, and I was listening to this and I'm like, wow, because it really was. I was kind of like, man, she's just like, and I'm going to talk about the size of genitalia and blah, blah, blah. And like, wow. And I was like, this is interesting because you're either offended by 42 seconds in, or you're like, you go, girl, you be yourself, you embrace that whole, and I was like, wow. And if you think about it, a lot of times, do I dare say the T word? I mean, let's face it. The reason the guy got elected is President Trump was very splitting, man. You either love the dude or you hated him. And Howard Stern, you either love him or hate him. Rosie O'Donnell, you either exactly. So, why did I get on this subject? How did I get
I think you're trying to say start the anti-McRib podcast.
Yeah.
You're saying.
Don't steal my idea.
We want an audience.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, it's not. I mean, anytime you take an extreme side, you're going to easily find you're going to, right? I mean, and then the people who don't like that side are probably going to talk about you. So,
well, that's what
does it mean it's a good idea?
Yeah. When I heard about
That's
Zach's podcast, I was like, oh, that's got to be fun because you're going to have some people like, oh, you believe in a, fairy tale zombie arc, blah, blah, and then you got the science people and just, you have, and that's to me, if you can do it as, again, for those of you that remember malls, we also used to have these things called dialogues, and you could actually talk to people and hear different sides of a conversation. And in some cases, in the immortal words of Bill Cosby, and you know what, maybe we won't quote that guy, but you just might learn something, if you hear different sides of the opinion. I know I learned so much in 2020 just because of all the crap that was going on. I didn't know about half, because I'm a middle-aged white dude. I didn't have any clue what was going on with all the injustice. I knew, but I didn't know. And I finally took time to go learn. And I was like, what? And so if you can have and I think that's why podcasting is great. You can't have a dialogue on TV. They will crucify you.
Yeah.
So
That's what I love about our hosts and having so many that are like, we're not all in the same place. Like I said, I'm a pastor and I'm there with my rabbi co-host, and we're obviously not going to agree on everything,
right.
Just by definition. But like, we want to model constructive conversations one way or the other, agree or disagree, because we're not going to get as many. Because I think the article was saying that you're more likely to get 5-star or 1-star reviews.
Yeah.
Because people rate when they love it or hate it. If you're just ambivalent about it, then you're not going to do anything about it. You're not called to action by it, which, I mean, I don't want to brag or anything, but we have 20 ratings on iTunes. So kind of a big deal.
I think I have 9. I'm a little
No 1-star yet. We
well,
haven't
then you're
made
not a real
anyone mad.
podcaster yet.
Well, because we're not inflammatory.
And that's why on Amazon, you don't read the 5-star reviews. You don't read the 1-star reviews. You read the 3-star reviews. Because those are the people who have a genuine thing to say usually about the item. Like, it wasn't quite what I want. It's not built as quite as well, but it works, right? I find that very helpful. I didn't come up with that. I got that as a tip from somebody, and I was like, that actually is interesting.
Yeah, that's
right?
me.
Because
I like 2 and 4. Because 2 is like, this totally stinks except for this one thing. And then, okay, so they like this. And then the 4 is like, I would have given it a 5, but it was missing this thing.
I
You're
like
like, oh,
those. I would have given it a 5, but it was cracked.
Yeah.
It's a mirror, so
that's the problem.
Yeah, I don't know where we land on the value of ratings and reviews. We've always kind of danced around. I mean, no one's ever really known. We know that getting reviews or not is not going to necessarily, it's not the magic trick to getting number 1 in iTunes, right? Or Apple Podcasts.
Why does everyone
right?
say someone should research? Where did that come from? Who was the first?
I mean, it is one of those things that get into the
the same reason people say a Blue Yeti is a great microphone. It's just it was repeated so many times
it
over and over.
It's also because no one knows. It seems logical. You're like, oh, if you tell Apple we're really good, Apple's going to show it to more people. That's kind of like maybe because we've grown up on Google, right? Like if you go to my website and you click links, and Google's going to, it's algorithm, but iTunes or Apple Podcast, a lot of those lists were hand curated for a long time, I believe. I don't even know if algorithms came into it very much. At least the biggest list. I think some of the sort of subcategory lists were more programmatic, but we know that runs on subscriptions primarily. Number of subscriptions within the last. Rob, I
think it's 24 hours. Yeah.
Listen to the feed. He has all of those stats, and he actually figured out what was then the algorithm. But ratings and reviews can be like a signal to Apple that something is maybe people are talking about it or getting attention, and maybe it'll surface their attention towards it, maybe, but it's not the thing. Everyone says it. Half the time, I don't know if people, I mean, it's a vanity metric. People want it, right? Like Zach, you were saying, which every new podcaster does, you check the stats constantly when you're new. When you get 2 more downloads, that's a huge, you're like, we got 2 more, 10 more, 20 more. We're huge, right? And you get a rating or review. that is the serotonin or dopamine, whatever it is, going right into your brain. That is the like on your Instagram post. That's the share on your Twitter. Like, it's a drug for people. So I don't know. Or it is affirming. You're like, oh, a human says we're good. Like, right.
Mhm.
As opposed to, downloads are numbers. They're people, but you see them as numbers. A review, it's really cool when it comes in. You're like, holy cow, someone I don't know is listening to the show and they wrote about it. So I don't know if it's people who don't know what their call to action is, or they just hear that on the podcast they listen to, so they go with it. They're like, that sounds
That's
great.
Yeah.
the first review you get from somebody that you don't know
Yeah, it's
is
huge.
is transcendent.
Yeah.
Like, we got a $1 a month Patreon subscriber, and none of us could figure out who this guy was. And we're here trying to record a podcast episode beforehand, like Google stalking this guy on, like, trying to find him on LinkedIn. Where does he live? What's his email address? Who is this guy? How do we know him? We don't know this person, and he's giving us money. What is wrong? What is this world? And it felt amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
gotta have
that's
metrics, I think. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
well, that's all right, but that's when it becomes real. That's what it was for me. I remember when I first started, and got to realize I'm divorced and bankrupt, living in my brother's basement. I'm doing a podcast, and my first voicemail ever came from a guy in Nuremberg, Germany. And I was like, I actually hit stop, and my brother was sitting there with me, and I go, did he just say Nuremberg, Germany? And we hit play again, and we just kept hitting, like, what is this? Like, is that for real? Like, am I getting punked? Like, what's going on? And that's when you're like, I think people are actually listening to this. Like, holy cow. And that's when that's like Ray said, it's the dopamine. You're hooked. You're officially addicted to podcasting at that point.
And as a non-sponsored plug, but as a favor to our co-host, my podcast reviews, I can't insert my affiliate link here, which is sad, but check that out, because those international reviews, like, you don't know, you could be getting ratings and reviews in other countries and you won't really know about it, even on different platforms now. That's Daniel's site, and it's really cool. You should check it out, because hashtag not sponsored, but sort of. But you can, if you are curious what ratings and reviews you have, you can sign up over there, and it'll cover globally where you're getting, and you can get your shot of dopamine. Like, this is amazing, people. I didn't realize someone in Switzerland was listening to this podcast. Or we see the little map in our metrics, right? Like, you're like, oh, all the green places are the countries. I'm in 105 countries. That always feels really cool, right? When you're in all these countries, even China, where, they have the infamous, not paywall, what am I looking for? Just the firewall, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can't get through, like, through traditional means, but a podcast can be heard in China, and you'll see people are listening. So, there is really something very cool about getting feedback. I mean, podcasters always want feedback, and it's very hard to get. But I think it's important to note that it's not the thing that's going to, like, bring in the audience. It's just one of those nice sort of self-motivating things. One of those things, Angela, like, keeps us going. Like, you're like, I've got the passion. Someone else got the passion. I didn't really want to do an episode today. I'm doing it now. I mean, I'm telling you, when people say they've been listening to the Roundtable and it's helped them, after 151 episodes or rounds, there are times where you're like, I don't know if I want to do another round, but it always works. It always works. It's such the fuel of the fire, because that's what we're trying to do, is motivate other people to do the same thing. Podcast, keep podcasting, start a podcast. So that stuff really, its value is not in your ranking in Apple Podcast. It's in you, the podcaster.
I get a lot of emails, so I do have some reviews, but I have way more emails with people giving feedback about how an episode, made them think differently, or I just didn't know. I got one that stands out, saying, I've been a leader in corporate America for all these years and always thought I was so fair, and I just can't believe how I didn't know that racism existed in this way, and that maybe colleagues had these types of things happening. And so thank you, because these conversations have helped me, and it's going to change how I operate. So for me, that makes me feel like I made an impact. And so that is a real win. And that excites me, knowing that, wow, something I did is probably if that's going to get a leader to make a change, how many lives that can affect at an organization. So, just maybe little to some people, but that's a big deal for me.
Gas in the tank, man. That's awesome.
Wait until that first moment, and you may have had it, where you meet someone in person who listens to the podcast, or someone. I remember someone was driving in a car. I think it was Corey Finneran, who like tweeted it out. They was listening to a podcast, and it was like, I think it was a roundtable in the back. I was like, holy cow! Like those moments in real life are very weird. Or someone meets you and says, "Oh my god, I listened to your podcast and I recognize your voice," and you've never met this person.
I've
Like,
had some of
That
those.
happened to me on TikTok the other week.
nice, there you go.
I'm a big TikToker. My daughter puts me on TikTok, and I look awful.
It was a comment I put on a video, and they were like, "I love your podcast," and I was like, "I don't know what's going on with this world, but I'm in it." And
Yeah,
I sent it to all my co-hosts, and I was on cloud 9 for a week.
and that's just it. That's exactly one of those things where you don't start a podcast for that reason, because it is sort of people want to be, they want to be known, or they do Instagram, want to be an influencer, but like you have to start the podcast for you, and then those are the things that happen that you didn't expect, like I was talking about earlier, and it just like blows you away, or like you said, Dave, gas in the can, like it keeps you going, because this is not, you talk about Anchor and 1 episode, 3 episodes, and you're done. You'll find out real fast that any motivation that doesn't include like, I want to be here for me and the subject, pretty much you won't be there very long. So it's hard to do, in organizations, talking about Angela, like I know I work for an organization that has a podcast, and some of those shows, I try to stress how important the host is, because a lot of organizations will want to put a host forward, and I don't care. I care less about knowledge and skill and all that stuff. All the stuff I can teach them, they have to really be into it, because a lot of them will do 6 months, a year, and then they have other jobs. They realize how hard it is, and they're gone. And it's hard to do that to a podcast audience. It's hard to find another host who can just be in that seat. But then you got to think about the audience who is often listening, not because because they like the subject, they like the host too, right? There are plenty of podcasts that will fit your interest, but you just don't fit with the host. You just might not like their presentation style. So
Or the way they interview. I'm very particular
There
about
you
that.
go.
And I think it's because I worked in news for 16 years before I went to the agency world. And I'm thinking like, oh my God, you should have followed up with this question or that question. Or I listen and I'm like, nope, can't do it. There are days where I just have to, even some of my regular ones, I'm like, nope, can't listen to that. No, it's just not good.
we've all yelled at our phones. We've all yelled at a podcast, I think, into the void.
When an interview starts off with "tell me a little bit about yourself," it takes everything I have not to just go and next podcast, because
Or even the same questions. I noticed someone who asked the same questions every time, and I guess that maybe can be a format, but it's starting to feel like they're tone deaf to the guest.
Yeah.
So,
oh yeah. I
So
always love when it's like, and that's when, I was taken up into space and, blah, blah, blah. And I went to the planet going, and then they brought me back into Montana, and the person goes, "Great. Tell me about your aha moment." And you're like, wait, what? What? I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. So
I just asked myself, what would Terry Gross do? And then that gets me through to the next one.
Nice.
and then you start asking questions like this.
Pay attention.
Yes. Fascinating. Tell me about your childhood. Was that traumatic for you?
Well, as I was saying, there was an alien in a ship, and I went to this thing, and they did
Yeah.
All right. That is the official sign that we need to go. When things just, even the voices get lower, people start mumbling, it's aliens, Terry Gross. Like things just get weird. We're just mixing topics, subjects, icons. It just does, none of it makes sense. It really helps me as a host to know when to shut the door. So let's shut the front door. Let's get out of here. Let's tell
someone in the chat though said they
Awesome.
liked my lipstick. So
yes, that was way back. I was
Patrick
going to make
Keller.
sure you saw
they
that.
said my lipstick was fire. I'm like, okay, it's
That was
Mac.
Patrick.
Right.
Patrick Keller, a hardcore roundtabler. I love Patrick. and
Okay,
he-
Patrick,
yeah.
it's Mac. I only use Mac lipstick, so it might be called Cream Sheen. I think. There you go.
That's helping someone. I'm hashtag not sponsored. We should be.
Not
Where's the
sponsored.
Mac? We could do a podcasters 8 series roundtable on lipstick. We all have, Dave, you gotta wear lipstick. You're gonna love it. It's
I
gonna
gotta
change your
bust
life.
get out my pancake makeup,
We could do some
do my
Kiss
little
like
rich
makeup.
imitation.
We
yeah.
could, we have
We
a
do
great
like-
series. Ooh, we could make it a rock and roll round podcast. Rock and roll. Remember I told you how I know when we're supposed to leave? That was supposed to happen. That's what we were doing. It did remind
gotta
me
work
of the
on my
whole series
McRib.
that series podcast thing, though, to be serious, was a thought I was having and forgot. I don't know about you guys. I do like the idea of like a series that has a start and an end that's maybe 6 episodes, because it's highly consumable. Oftentimes it tells a story. I hope it tells a story from start to end. Missing Richard Simmons was my favorite, and it's probably the podcast I've recommended to most people because you can start it and end it. It's not a commitment. I didn't just put you onto a podcast that you have to listen to indefinitely. It is like, try this podcast thing, get super turned on by this podcast thing, and then go find your own. So
like a mini series.
A miniseries, yeah. I think it's really, if you can do it well, it's a good model. But anyways, we are out of here. Let us know where we can find your podcast, and just thanks again so much, Zack. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Where can we find that podcast?
Downthewormhole.com or anywhere you get your podcasts.
Very cool. It's almost like I'm specifying the URL. Maybe rate and review Zack's podcast. I'll give you that CD.
Oh yeah, rate and review. 5 stars
Rate and review,
only,
5
please.
stars. Awesome. Angela, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's been great. My podcast is Now Look Inward. So just look up Now Look Inward wherever you get podcasts. And I'm on a little hiatus, but it won't be 90 days before I come back. So
Right on. Plenty of time to consume that back catalog, and then she'll be back.
right.
Dave Jackson, thank you so much, man.
Yes, I have a special URL. Since we're talking about Apple's top podcast, if you can get them to me by December 14th, what was your absolute favorite podcast in 2020? Go to schoolofpodcasting.com/question. I need that by the 14th. It comes out on the 28th.
I guess episode applies too, right? Because that is telling you the podcast. You want to know podcast as a whole.
Yeah, there's 2 things. I want to know what the podcast is, what it's about, and then the big thing I'm looking for is, why is it your favorite podcast?
Fantastic.
Because it's like, because that's really what I'm interested in. And then, of course, if you have a podcast, plug your podcast while you're at it.
Right on. Dave, where can we get that book?
That's not a book. Oh,
no,
this
behind
book
you. The one behind you, if you're watching the video.
The book behind me. Profit from your podcast. You can find at, Ray, you want to guess the URL?
Profit I can read. Profitfromyourpodcast.com.
That's it, my friend.
Very cool. All right. That is, I can't believe it's a physical book you can own. I was hoping to get the audiobook to text version.
2 chapters are in the can. The audiobook is coming.
Okay. Who's it read by you, I hope?
Read by me.
Okay.
And I announced at the beginning that yes, I'm reading the book, but it's Dave Jackson. So yes, there will be tangents. So
all right, cool. Well, podcastersroundtable.com/guest. If you are still listening or watching this, you are definitely the person that would sign up there. So podcastersroundtable.com/guest will get you on a round, and we'll, be ridiculous and have a great time. So thanks again, everyone. We will see you next time for 152. Wave goodbye.
All right.